This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Forest Park is one of the largest urban parks in the United States, and among the very many creatures that make their home there, its most famous wild resident is a great horned owl named Charles. In our first conversation today, we talked about spring planting with Missouri Botanical Gardens' Daria McKelvey. And as it happens, Daria has also been cultivating a personal passion, following owls, under the mentorship of our next guest, Mark H.X. Glenshaw, an award-winning naturalist who's been following Charles for close to 20 years. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Great to meet you. And
yes,
my thanks to you and your team for having me back for a 9th time.
Yes, and thank you to Daria for sticking around to go from talking trowels to talking owls.
Thank you.
So, Daria, what was your introduction to owl prowling with Mark?
I actually happened to catch one of Mark's lectures during the pandemic, and I was like, oh, I walk in Forest Park all the time. And just so happens I went on a different route, and I saw Mark's car. His license plate says Owlman. Okay. Found Mark, and the rest is history.
Was part of the reason you were drawn to owl watching parallels between gardening and that activity?
Kind of. I love nature in general, and I spend probably half my life outside. So I was, just in that, looking at stuff like plants all around. It just adds to all that I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm. Well, when we talked about gardening, you said that the first things that you planted, not all of them, came to fruition. But was there a moment where you were just hooked? Like owl prowling is something that you were going to continue to do?
I never really thought about it. I just did it. I was like, this is kind of fun. So I just kept up with it.
Yeah. And it's been 4 years?
4 years, yeah.
Mark, what place does mentoring and community around owl watching have in, owl preservation or research or protection?
It has a tremendous part. It's so important to plant the seeds, just to continue with our gardening metaphors, of people's interests and passion. And one of the great things about nature, while it's amazing to have experts like Daria, is that anyone, no matter what they do, what they studied in school, how tall they are, if they're left-handed or right-handed, anyone can study nature in a very rich and rewarding way. If you had said to me 20 years ago, you're going to be studying owls and giving presentations and so forth, I would have been concerned for your mental and or emotional health. But mentoring people and creating community is huge. And mentoring folks is one of the greatest joys and honors and surprises of my work with the owls. Mm-hmm. Because I thought, wow, I'm just into this myself, and now I'm teaching other people, and they're so into it. And it's a responsibility I take very seriously, but we also have a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. And what's great is not just, I've become friends with Daria, but all these other people that come out to watch the owls, we've all become friends with each other. Mm-hmm. And we're from different backgrounds, different ages, professions, you name it. But we all connect on owls and then connect on other things. Oh, you're interested in this? Me too. Cool. Mm-hmm.
Daria, have you managed to rope other people into owl prowling because of this interest? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I regularly talk about it at work. So a lot of my volunteers have heard about Charles, and a couple of them actually are scheduled to do some owl prowls or looking into doing owl prowls with Mark. So
okay.
Yes, I've definitely roped a couple of people in.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Thank you.
What is it that you would say to people who are considering trying this out? What would you say to get them to make that first step?
It's just really amazing. I think Charles is actually a very special owl. I've seen other great horns, and Charles is very regal. There's something about him I cannot put my finger on, and he's the one probably that captured all of us. Mm-hmm. So, and Mark too, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just something about him that's captivating. And I think also having Mark explain his behaviors and his knowledge base, it makes it just so much more fun. And I think that's part of getting hooked.
Mm-hmm. Well, we didn't plan for this, but it was kismet that you both were booked for today's show. Daria, thank you for sticking around to talk owls with us. Daria McKelvey is the supervisor of home gardening information and outreach at Missouri Botanical Garden. And we're talking with naturalist Mark Glenshaw today about the great horned owls that live in Forest Park. So, Mark, as a reminder, who is this regal Charles? What's the short story of his history at the park? Yeah.
The short story is quite a long story now. I've been studying Charles for 19 years, along with his mates and their offspring. And he's just an endlessly fascinating owl, and the dynamics of the owls and their interactions in the park are just complex and ever-growing. As I often like to say, the owls are fascinating. They're sometimes frustrating, and sometimes other F words.
Sure.
And we love to connect people with the owls. One of the interesting things about a lot of folks who study nature, sometimes they're not always the most people-oriented people. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important to infect people with that germ of interest and enthusiasm. Mm-hmm. I could be really boring talking about the great horned owl is the most widespread, commonly found out. You're not going to have me back on the show for a ninth time.
Right,
but if I'm interested, engaging, and make it fun, it's going to get people into it. So Charles just keeps unfolding new chapters in his life. I have more questions about owls now than I did 19 years ago when I knew almost nothing about owls.
Right. Well, Charles and his life, I think this has been a big attraction for people. And the last time you were on our show was in 2023, and that was when senior producer Emily Woodbury accompanied you on an owl prowl, and that was the night of the spring equinox. And at that time, you were watching to see whether Charles would mate with a female that you had christened Tess. What is it that happened there?
Well, unfortunately, things did not go well with Tess. We were really hopeful that Charles and Tess would mate and have owlets, and they started to court in the winter of 22-23 and then march out with Emily. Right around that time is when Tess moved into the territory. She didn't move in initially. She was a very traditional, old-fashioned female. But she eventually moved in, and she and Charles became a pair, and they spent the rest of the spring and the summer and the fall building up their bond, courting. And then at a key time, Tess disappeared. The last we ever saw Tess was November 16th, 2023. And at that point, Charles and Tess were very close to the period of when they began to mate and nest. And unfortunately, the only real conclusion I can draw from her disappearance is that she most likely died. And on the 16th, she looked fine. She didn't look ill or injured or anything like that. But we have not seen her again. So Charles was again single, and Tess was his seventh mate.
Seventh.
In my time studying him.
Right. Well, December 2023 brought a May surprise. Mark, tell us about that.
In December 2023, a new female arrived. Charles was single pretty briefly this time. He's been single sometimes days, sometimes almost a year one time. But this female showed up, and right away she told us something very interesting about her, that she was very young, about a year old. Maybe 10 months, maybe 12 months, maybe 14, but right around 1 year of age. And we knew her age for two reasons from her behavior. One, she was a little clumsy. Two, all owls will bob their heads in a very methodical way when they're checking out something more carefully, getting a better understanding of the depth perception. Young owls, they bob their heads like they're at a concert by their favorite band.
Okay.
And right away, this female was bobbing her head like a young owl. And
right.
We said, oh my gosh, this is a young owl. She's about a year old. All of the previous 7 females, we knew they were at least 2 to 3, but was Tess 7? Was Danielle 17? We don't know. But May, we knew she was young. And Charles, being not so young, big reason we named May was that it is a May-December romance.
So we did get a couple of questions from folks on Facebook, and one of them was a question from Christine. What time of year do great horned owls hoot the most? Do they only hoot at night? And do males hoot more than females or vice versa?
Thank you, Christine. I saw your question online. I'm glad to have this opportunity to answer it. In our area, great horned owls hoot the most in the fall and winter, and they will be very quiet in the summer, especially if they have kids. But you can listen for the hissing, rasping calls of their youngsters. And they hoot for many reasons: to declare and defend territory, to build their pair bonds. And this is how new pairs also court. And the pair bonds are really important, whether the pair is brand new or has been around together. So they will hoot around sunset, sunrise, and in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm. Is there any association between hooting and mating? To go back to Charles and May, I mean, will they be mating this year?
No, unfortunately, the window, as wide as it is, the window has closed. Now, if I'm wrong and they mate tonight, who will be happiest? The person pointing their thumbs at me. Oh, wait, that's me. Now, one other for Christine, males do hoot more than females. Like most birds, the males are a little more vocal. But there is a very much direct connection with hooting and mating. Hooting is almost the build-up, the appetizer to mating. And when they duet, hooting together, we measure duets intensity like the gears of a car, first gear all the way up to fifth. And mating usually occurs at fifth gear.
Oh, okay. So seventh mate, but we're looking for fifth gear as far as
yes.
telling what is happening.
And we've had some close calls, almost mating. And last year, Charles and May did not mate, I think because of two reasons. One, she was so young. She's still learning the world. Charles, very experienced. Charles and May's predecessors have had 27 babies. Mm-hmm. So Charles really knows what it takes to have a successful parenting partnership. And I think Charles looked at her and said, welcome, you're lovely and awesome, but you don't know what you're doing, and I'm not going to go there with you yet. And also it was very clear that May did not fully know what she was doing last year, and even some this year.
Okay.
Last year in their interactions, it was like you're watching two actors on stage, and Charles is the actor who knows the work inside and out, and May's the last-minute call-up who hasn't received all the pages of the script. Mm-hmm. And this year, May has matured. She's even grown physically. But this year, it's still clear that she's still learning about the birds and the birds.
Right. We also got a note from Jeremy on Facebook, and this sort of takes it to owls that are not in Forest Park, but in backyards. And Jeremy had asked or said that he can't wait to start seeing the babies as they learn to fly and hunt. How is it that owls learn behaviors, Mark?
Excellent question, Jeremy. A lot of it is very instinctual, and then just as Daria was talking about gardening, trial and error, just watching the parents and also just trying out themselves. The owlets have to first learn how their bodies work. They have to learn how to grab something and bring it to their mouth. So they'll often do predatory play, as I call it, grabbing a branch and bringing it to their bill to nibble on it, just like we do as infants, and learn how to coordinate our bodies. And then they slowly start with insects and move up from there. And lots of trial, lots of error.
How is it that you can spot these owls if you're out on a walk in Forest Park? That was a question that we got from Gianna.
Excellent question, Gianna. It's challenging. Even after 19 years, I'll still walk right by them. And then other times I need 30 seconds. I've even learned some of their spots that I can look at and find them while I'm driving my car.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
And that's a skill level that's challenging to get to. Mm-hmm. And then other days, I need over an hour to find one of them. Mm-hmm. So a big part of mentoring folks like Derry is teaching them where to look and how to look. A big phrase I use for any wildlife watching is it's all about the angle. The difference between seeing an animal and not seeing an animal can be inches.
Yeah.
And also part of learning how to look is the ethical side, how to be a good guest in their behavior, in their territory, and watching their behavior to make sure that you're not annoying them or being a negative presence, intrusive indeed.
Beyond owls, have you witnessed recent sightings of other birds or even other species at Forest Park that's worth noting?
Yes, we've had a very healthy wild turkey population in the western part of the park. Quite a nice flock for the last couple of years. I even had an interesting sighting as I was going into the park on Christmas Day. Yes, I was out on Christmas. I did come back and have Christmas dinner. And I was driving on 40 just near the Tam Bridge by the zoo, and I saw a bunch of large birds on the ground, and I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting that there are Canada geese there. And I realized, oh my gosh, those are wild turkeys.
Oh.
And they're in this crowded area of the park, crowded by humans, on Christmas when the park is quite quiet and empty.
Yeah.
So these wild turkeys have been quite bountiful and really exciting to see them succeed and flourish.
We've recently talked about avian influenza on the show. Is there any threat of that affecting Charles and other birds at Forest Park, Mark?
Yes, unfortunately. And just recently a wood duck, which is a native Missouri species, a wild one, was found dead in the St. Louis Zoo and examined, and it had died from avian influenza. And just a scary coincidence, and back to Gianna's question, on that day, we were having a hard time finding the owls. And I was trying not to freak out too much, but still, they can get avian influenza and die from it.
In our last minute, Mark, you regularly host owl prowls and talks about the great horned owls who live in Forest Park. Where can people find more information about upcoming events?
Definitely. They can find that on my blog, forestparkowls.blogspot.com. I also post regularly on Facebook. You can follow me on Instagram at Forest Park Owls, on Twitter at Forest Park Owls. I'm all over the place.
And I have to ask before we go, Daria mentioned a bumper sticker or a sticker on your car.
License plate.
A license plate.
License plate.
Do you have an owl tattoo?
I do not.
Yet.
Maybe. Never say never. But yes, my license plate, people recognize me from that. And that's often a way people will find the owls is find Mark's car, then go find Mark. He's well camouflaged, but he's easier to find than the owls.
Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be back.
Mark H.X. Glenshaw is a naturalist and longtime watcher of Charles, the great horned owl in Forest Park.
This episode was produced by Emily Woodbury.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.